folks. Welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people across entrepreneurship, technology, and cybersecurity. My name is Warner Moore. I am a technologist and security leader who helped build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies who's passionate about modern cybersecurity practices. I'm also the founder of Gamma Force. At Gamma Force, we help tech and health tech companies with cybersecurity strategy through fractional executive services and execution as your fractional cybersecurity organization. I'm excited to have Shawn Price here with us today. Shawn started his career as a full stack engineer, focusing on web applications, and then later focusing on mobile applications. Over the past 10 years, Shawn has served as co-founder and CTO at Healthy Roster, where he built the first prototype, and now he leads the technology team that builds a software as a service, or SaaS, electronic medical record, EMR platform for athletic trainers. So Shawn was getting tired of working for other people and had a couple irons in the fire between software and real estate. One of his past coworkers closed a few deals, and then suddenly Shawn had to build a prototype. And fortunately, this was funded by revenue. So startup time for Shawn. Goodbye corporate life. What was the transition like for you, Shawn?
It was interesting. I always say that people that are in IT or tech have less of a risk factor, especially at that time with doing the startup thing, right? Because if it doesn't work out, I can always go back and get a job as a consultant or pick up work here and there. But for me at the time, I put in my 2 weeks notice while I was on paternity leave, and so I had a newborn baby at home. It was my first kid. And so, that felt like there was a much bigger risk factor there, because I didn't even know how to raise this baby, let alone raise another startup baby at the same time, which they both needed love and attention. So, that was probably the biggest transition for me. It When we kind of were working through this, I had built it was not even a prototype; it was just a proof of concept to show them exactly what it was, and it was in the telehealth field because we were a telehealth company before telehealth was interesting, and people actually didn't want to use telehealth at the time, which we learned the hard way. But the idea was in the sports medicine space, in the outreach setting, these athletic trainers actually work for local hospitals, and then they are on the sidelines, placed on the sidelines of these sporting events at high schools and colleges, because the idea is they want to be there for every bump, bruise, and scrape, so that when you do get that really expensive ACL surgery, they can guide you to stay in the network that they work for. And so we were pitching the idea of, hey, make it really easy to reach out to these athletic trainers, so you don't miss any of those opportunities to guide them to the healthcare that they need. And that resonated with people. And the prototype was literally a button on a phone that launched a FaceTime application, which was not HIPAA compliant at all. So we could have never gone live with it. But it resonated with people enough that when Dan went out to sell it, Dan, my co-founder, we had 6 hospital systems immediately say, yes, we're on board. We want to purchase it. And like you mentioned, I didn't have anything that we could actually launch built. And so while on paternity leave, I had to go and spend a ton of time building out exactly what we would need to launch. Without any support network. You're on your own there, so it's not like, hey, I can lean on somebody else to help me through this tough time of this newborn baby at home. It was, if I didn't do it, it wasn't going to get done. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things transitioning into a startup, especially if you're coming from a larger company. Hey, if somebody doesn't get their job done, there's usually somebody else to come in and pick up the slack. And if you're in a startup, if you don't do it, it doesn't get done. And really transitioning to that ownership mindset of everything. So yeah, that was probably the biggest transition step for me.
Yeah, I like that. For some people, it might sound like the wrong order of events, right? I sold the thing, then had to build it. And I think we don't talk about the importance of that order of events and the startup ecosystem enough. Often we're talking about getting VC funding, getting outside capital, like building things, no customers, right? where getting customers first is the exact right thing to do. And even better, not only was Shawn and his co-founders able to build the product, they had money to do it. And then that foundation is even better positioned for outside investment if it makes more sense. So 5 years in 2020, COVID hit, and Healthy Roster was focused on athletic trainers working with sports teams. Suddenly, no more team sports. How do you keep the business alive?
Yeah, it was I wouldn't say hit or touch and go there. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was something where um, the writing was on the wall. We had taken VC funding by that point, and so yes, we were had revenue, and we had crossed the $1 million mark in annual recurring revenue, but it wasn't sustainable in and of itself yet, and so we were concerned about a slow year and what that would mean for us, and it was very clear that we weren't going to hit our numbers that we wanted to on selling to athletic trainers because people weren't hiring athletic trainers. Athletic trainers were getting laid off. Entire programs were getting shut down um, without sports, and it was across the board. We had the year prior launched a mental health screening platform for our sports medicine EMR because that was a huge issue in sports was especially in the collegiate sports where uh, these athletic trainers weren't really equipped to handle the population health management of mental health. They didn't have the tools in place, and a lot of the procedures they just didn't know. And so we had launched this mental health screening platform that had resonated a lot with people. And the PGA Tour actually was doing a large push around mental health, and we had talked to them about rolling that out just before COVID hit. And when COVID hit and everything shut down, um, and the PGA Tour was trying to keep operating because they're outdoors. We can keep, doing our thing, but we have to put all these protocols in place. They reached out to us and asked if we could adapt what we had built around mental health screening for COVID screening so that they could have a system in place to make sure everybody was healthy and safe. And, we had built it out in a flexible enough way that we felt like, yeah, okay, we can make some changes here and make that work. And sure enough, we did. And that picked up not just with the PGA Tour, but with all of our other customers that were suddenly trying to get back to business as usual. How are they going to do that with all the safety protocols in place? And so that was we knew going into it that that was short-term revenue. We knew this is not durable. We can't book this as annual recurring revenue year over year. So we've got to keep this separate on our books, but it's operating revenue at the end of the day, and that's what we needed at the time because people weren't going to fund us based on our other sales, right? So we need to keep the doors open somehow, and that really took off for us, almost too much. To the point where we weren't, built for that. When we launched that mental health screening platform, that was something that they would send out at the beginning of the year and quarterly. And so the numbers that we had kind of built this platform to handle, was not something that we had to scale massively for, and there weren't wild swings in scales. And overall, our platform has very clear scaling needs. Every fall, we double in size, and it's been over the 10 years that's been very consistent. So we know exactly what we need to do to scale up our resources, and we've built it in a way that it's horizontally scalable there, but not in a overnight we need to do this. And over the course of a month of selling this COVID screening platform where things really picked up, we had anticipated something like a few thousand screenings a quarter, and now we were doing in the ballpark of 1 million screenings a day. And suddenly, that's a whole different number than what we were planning on dealing with. And there were calls to telehealth or telecommunication platforms that we weren't set up to scale like that we had to re-architect a lot of that, um, and how we were handling all of that. And so that was probably one of the biggest technical problems that we run into as a company is how do we handle that? Because it was also a mission critical system for everybody. It had to go out at the beginning of every day. They had to get their screenings before people could go to school or go participate in sporting events. And if they didn't have a little green screen saying, yes, we are approved, they wouldn't get in the building. And so being able to handle that was a probably one of our biggest challenges. But luckily we got through it.
Yeah, it's insane to think back of all the things we went through during the shutdown and pandemic times. It very much a different world. I want to come back to the scaling thing, but first, you ended up pivoting to doing health screening, and well, we don't have a pandemic now, so what what happened? Did you transition back to the earlier product, or did the business evolve from there?
Yeah, I mean, so we kept selling the earlier product, and we knew it was a temporary pause because sports were going to come back eventually, and people were going to need athletic trainers eventually. We just knew it was going to be a gap in our sales, and because we needed that revenue to operate, that was a problem for us, and so we needed to focus on something that was going to drive that short-term revenue. Eventually, that screening, those sales tapered off, and it was over the course of really 2 years, 2 to 3 years actually, because there were still people using it 3 years later. That completely kind of tapered off, and then we were continuing to sell our electronic medical records platform through that whole process, and those sales picked up over time as well. And so, yeah, that's we never really lost sight of it. It was just where our focus shifted in the short term. So it wasn't a full-on pivot. It was just a temporary, hey, what do we got to do to keep the lights on situation. So.
I love that. Cash is king, right? I know entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur who often serves as CEO, and he has this anecdote about how he learned to always check bank accounts, right? Not just the P&L or the accounting reports. Look at the actual bank account, and
Yep.
it really stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, and we went through the whole Silicon Valley Bank thing too, which was, another, it was really only like 48 hours that there was a bit of panic going on. But that was, when it comes to checking your bank accounts, that was one of the, oh, we can't actually check our bank account right now. And that was one of the few moments of panic. Are we going to make payroll due to nothing that we did? But yeah, that was a whole nother journey that everyone went on there for a little bit. Um, but yeah, you got to keep the lights on however you can, and it's once you get on that funded kind of path, it's really easy just to rely on another check. But the timing, the number of startups that have gone under, not necessarily due to lack of any success, but lack of timing and being unable to manage their cash flow and make sure they make it to that next payroll. And hey, this round didn't close in time. What are we going to do? Making sure you're not dealing with we got 1 week of cash in the bank. How are we going to handle this? And managing that and staying ahead of it is definitely one of the major parts of the game in the startup world. So,
And can't miss payroll. Don't live
yeah,
that one down as a company.
yeah.
Uh, so on the scaling thing, you were talking about a spiky load profile. So every fall, is that the entire business doubling upon itself, or is it every fall the load profile doubling, and then after fall it goes down again? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's during the fall we double um, over what our traffic is going into the fall, and then it usually settles in at about 3/4 of that total, and so it's like a 25 endured, long-term increase, but we double for the August and September timeline, and then by October, it typically kind of tapers off to, 175% of what it was before or whatever.
Hmm.
So going into that, so. Yeah, so we don't need to. We know we need to spike up resources for a short time, and then we can back off it a little bit. But we just know that it's pretty consistent for us, and that's around fall sports because that's where our business is. So it always
I
works
guess
out that way.
football.
Yeah, football is the big one at the end of the day, and especially with summer, nobody's doing anything over the summer, but then going into to those fall sports with football, that then they need to do something because it's largely around the high school setting. It's evened out a little bit more now that we're in the pro settings and the college settings where they do a lot more over the summer. We do some occupational health stuff. The athletic training market has moved into that side of things as well. Injury prevention is a big part of it. And so that's year round, 24/7, actually, which was another thing that we had to deal with. It used to be at night, nobody used their product because nobody was playing sports at night. But now we're across the country and we have people using it 24/7 around the clock. And so trying to have zero downtime has been an important part of our architectural decisions as well. So
Hmm. Yeah, it's a luxury in health tech, frequently thinking more in terms of business hours. And well, it depends. I'm thinking my time at Cover My Meds, where we're doing PAs, which was a business process prior authorization. So that was not really a 24 by 7 activity. But in other parts of health, right, people get sick
yeah,
every hour of the day. So it can vary dramatically.
those maintenance windows have to be real small if you're going to do those. So yeah.
Well, before Healthy Roster, you were primarily serving as an individual contributor and engineer. Can you talk about your transition to management and how you look at your career evolution going from engineer to CTO?
Yeah. It's funny because for a long time the CTO title was, a glorified dev manager, and when we first started, it was, yeah, my title's CTO, but I'm just the dev at the end of the day. I'm the one building the whole thing. And so yeah, like you said, I was an individual contributor. I had led small teams, as a consultant, but it wasn't one of those things where I was worried about strategy a ton. It was, hey, I'm building things or I'm supporting other people building things slightly. But as we moved into Healthy Roster and over the years, it was probably I was very heavily into the dev for the first 5 years, I would say, of the company. And then, I started slowly backing out of a full-time dev role, whereas the last probably 2 years, going on 3 years, um, I've maybe written 3 lines of code during that entire time period. I still involved in a lot of the technical discussions and decisions, but I am not the decision maker around architecture at this point. And a major reason for that is because I hired great people to work with, and I trust them and their decisions. And yes, I'm going to act as a sounding board, but I don't need to tell them what to do. At the end of the day, I my role moving as I bring on great people that can do things better than I could have done them. My role then becomes strategic. Okay, how do I make sure everybody's working in the right direction? Because I am the technical side of things. I'm also the product side of things. I've been in charge of a product since day one, and actually what we build. And it's actually been helpful to focus more on the product and be less in the implementation of that, because it allows me to not think about why it's hard to do things and more think about what do we actually need to do. To be successful as a company, here's the problem we need to solve. And it's real easy when you're the one that has to actually do that work to say, is that really the problem we need to solve, when it's a hard problem, and it's going to take a lot of work to get through that. Um, it's a lot easier now that I'm just like, I know this is what's important for our business. Let's figure out how we do it. And you're smarter than me, so figure out how to do it. At the end of the day, I hired Alex, who works as our director of engineering. He's just very good at both um, running the team and actually being a technical resource as well. So he is doing a lot of the things that I was doing very early on, and I didn't have anybody doing the role that I'm doing right now. And so it's worked out really well for us, and it's allowed our team to grow and kind of mentor up junior developers as well. So
That's great. I want to highlight something you mentioned that I think is easy to miss. And especially in tech circles, we often glamorize and it's often fancy titles, right? VP, CTO, whatever, the executive or manager who can do technical work. And my background's technical, right? And I always wrestled with that, especially going into management. I'm interviewing and talking to and working with leading tech companies, and they're telling me to be a manager, I have to be the best engineer there is. And I'm interviewing for management roles, and they're some of the most difficult technical interviews I've had. And well, being that good technically was a full-time job. So
Yeah.
I it really took a lot of time and perspective to look at that the right way. And now I look at it as a complete career transition management. And I believe that if we are being effective managers, we're probably not going to be the best technical person in the room anymore. I, but where I do think it makes a lot of sense is having people who came from a technical career being in those leadership roles, not expecting a customer service or a account manager to be a good engineering manager.
Yeah.
That's a completely different field. So that technical background helps, but as a manager, we shouldn't be the best technical people in the room anymore.
100% agree. If you are, then I think there's a lot of insecurity in that sometimes, where like hiring somebody that's better than you, um, hey, I don't want to be replaced, right? I always want to be the smartest guy in the room. And the reality is I'm not the smartest guy in the room, especially I mean, there are things that I'm very good at, and that, yes, I'm the authority on, but in a lot of the topics that we cover, on a day-to-day basis as we're planning, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and that's by design, and it should be, or else we're not going to grow as a team. And it's important for me to recognize that too, that, hey, I might have an opinion on this, but it doesn't mean it's the right opinion. It's being a good manager is a choice. Like, you have to lean into that. And I was just talking about this with my director of engineering, the other day on our one-on-one, and he was talking about this actually, because he does a great job of mentoring the juniors on his team. He's very good at that, and it, I've always felt like leadership. There's something innate in that a little bit, where it's not something you necessarily uh, have to grow and work on. I've always been a natural leader. I was a poor manager, by default. And I think there's two different things. Like, leadership is very situational to me. I played sports in high school, and I could come into the huddle and rally the troops, right? But that doesn't mean I was great at managing people day to day. Because management's a slog at the end of the day. Leadership is exciting, and it's getting out there in front, and telling people where to go, and going through a crisis, and that came naturally to me. Making sure the team was effective over the course of the year, when things are boring, but we still need to move forward, that didn't come naturally to me. And that was something I had to spend a lot of time working on. So,
Hmm. I like that. I've worked with few executives who are also good managers. It's rare where a president or a CEO or whatever is an effective manager. But the most effective executives I've known and worked with are good managers too. And I think we love to culturally glamorize leadership. It's like, but when it comes to the hard work that's necessary and just as important and not valued culturally, the management work, um, if that's neglected, that's a challenge.
yeah. There's a book called Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, of Andreessen Horowitz. And you could say a lot about them as people, whatever. But from a book standpoint, I had a lot of really interesting things. And he talks about the kind of the wartime versus peacetime CEO. And I don't think you necessarily have to be both, but it is a different hat to wear. It's a different way of operating. Sometimes you have to make really hard decisions and put on that leadership hat when you're in wartime CEO. When, hey, COVID hit, and we need to figure out how we're going to pivot in a very short amount of time. That tends to be more of that leadership hat of how are we managing through this crisis? How are we getting over the hump? And then, okay, we got out of COVID, and now we're back to the slog of we're doing a massive rewrite on our front end, because we've been we haven't paid down enough technical debt. And that's what we've been working through for that past 2 years and are just coming out on the other side of that. And that's the management side of it. But that's what keeps companies growing and keeps it moving forward at the end of the day. So
So your team now, you're acting as a CTO, you have a management team. How do you help your managers be effective? Because it's hard enough going from an engineer and into a manager and not fiddling with the technical stuff. That's a well, at least for me, it was a
yeah.
huge shift. And then managing managers is a whole another big shift. What are some tips you have for that?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, as you move up, your role moves less from tactical and into strategic. And it's interesting because we're not that large of a company, but even in a company our size, where there's at least one layer of management underneath me, like reporting up to me, it's all about clear prioritization and understanding what the overall goal of the company is, and the strategy. What direction are you trying to take people in? Because that's the only way you can make sure multiple teams are all working in the same direction if you know where they're supposed to go. And going back to book recommendations, there's a book by, I think Melissa Perry is her name, Escaping the Build Trap. And it's the best product book I've ever read. It's not that long, and it's not that complicated. At the end of the day, it's not deep techniques or anything like that. The core concept of the book is you've got to know what direction you're supposed to move in, because otherwise it's too easy to become an order taker managing the product and be like, hey, everything suggestion comes in and then the newest one is the most important, and whatever the CEO says is the most important for that day because they thought of a new idea. Suddenly that shoots up to the product backlog or the top of the product backlog, right?
Mhm.
And that's what happens if you don't have a clear vision for where you're trying to go. Um, and so that's my role at this point, is making sure the dev team, the product team, kind of QA team, the roles, and even our customer success team knows what's most important to work on day to day, because that's the direction the company's going in. And if they know what they need to work on and they have the resources to work on that, they're super effective. The moment nobody knows, they're not quite sure what's important, what's the most important thing, um, that's when we have problems. And so, yeah.
I I've had it described to me before, and I really like this context. EM, engineering manager, is going to be more focused on team. A VP or director, and the next levels, VP, are going to be more operational, internally focused on the function, the technology organization, delivering. And then the executive, the CTO, is more external facing.
Mhm.
Building the team, ensuring that the culture is curated, looking at the market. Where is tech and product and industry going?
Yep.
Actually working on strategy, working on the business, on the
Mhm.
product instead of in the product. And I think that's I really like that context because it's so easy to get focused on titles and progression, but really, what are we doing in the end? And if we're not helping our teams be effective in their roles, well, we're all going to fail.
Right. And it's just another layer of strategic, right? At the end of the day, um, if you have two, three VPs reporting up to you, you got to make sure that they understand what role their team is playing in the grand scheme, and you don't have to tell them how to do that. You just need to make sure they're working in the right direction. And if you do have to tell them how to do that, probably not VP material at the end of the day, and you need to revisit that role because they're not ready to be strategic yet. But um, just making sure everybody is pushing in the same direction and have the resources that they need to get there is in my mind the biggest, for my current role, the biggest thing that I can do.
And I remembered the book, $1 Trillion Coach. It's a
Mm,
posthumous book about Bill Campbell. So this guy, I mean, he served on so many big name tech brand boards and was behind the scenes influential and commonly recognized as an exceptional leader and manager. And So Bill died, and Eric Schmidt of Google and a couple other people collected stories and wrote this book about him. And one of the biggest compliments I can imagine of somebody and the impact they made. And
Yeah,
really, really good book. And I think it complements the hard thing about hard things really well. Overlapping stories too, because
sure.
Anderson Horowitz, right? Dudu
Yeah,
or Mark Anderson created Netscape, right? So it's
yeah. There's a
the
lot of yeah.
same crew.
Hmm.
Well, cool. Yeah, I want to come back to spiky scale because
Sure.
we talked about it as a problem, as something you're managing, but we didn't really get to how you solve that. How do you approach your spiky scale?
Yeah, I mean, so the ideal situation is you can build things to be, infinitely horizontally scalable, right? Like, yeah, just throw more resources at it and you'll be all right. There's usually some sort of um, single point of failure where that falls down. It's usually at the database level or what have you. And so for us, that's really where it was. We had two things. We had things that were happening from a queue perspective to where we were publishing stuff to a queue and um, it needed to happen at a certain time of the day. And okay, now we were publishing 100 messages to that queue all at 7 a.m. because that's when all these surveys needed to go out. And they were each sending, 20, 30,000 surveys a piece, each of those messages. And so it was getting backed up. When, okay, now that we're at scale, we've got to parallel as much as possible, right? And so we do that. Now we're going out, we're calling out. We're using Twilio for sending out the text messages that were triggering the surveys on a daily basis. And then Twilio was turned around and calling us back. And so we've parallelized all this. That wasn't all that hard because it was asynchronous through a message queue. But now Twilio's sending us and flooding us with millions of messages in a short amount of time, right? Which is fair because we just flooded them with a ton of messages as well. And so we had, and the database became the single point of failure for that. And so it's like, okay, now we need to parallelize that, and we need to back that into a queue where things that were, previously happening synchronously now have to happen asynchronously, but they have to happen in a fast enough time so that people can react to it. Hey, this result came back, and it's hey, you said you had this symptom, you get a red screen instead of the green screen, right? They need that immediately, so it can't wait for an hour to go. And so a lot of that was we were still dealing with a relational database. We're on SQL Server on the back end, and yeah, we could beef that up a little bit, but that gets real expensive, especially on SQL Server, running that on AWS on RDS. With any sort of redundancy or resiliency whatsoever, that adds up very quickly. And so it was a lot of just refactoring how quickly we could read and write and how quickly we could process these things. Could we move more up into actually out of the database layer and into a logical layer, which we could scale horizontally? And so it's very simple read and writes versus trying to actually do any sort of processing as part of those read and writes. And so it almost turned some of those tables into kind of NoSQL document repository tables where it's as simple as possible. It's a quick read, quick write. IO is the only thing we need to worry about. And so those were the big things that we had to refactor because they weren't something that were in consideration based on the scale originally. I would say it was still the right decision for us not to factor those into the scale concerns when we were first writing it because it would have been premature optimization. We would have spun a lot of cycles when we didn't necessarily need it. And we've had things that we've built that did not that take off like that. And quite frankly, we've had things where we built it expecting it to take off, and so we spent a lot of time worrying about performance. And sure enough, we never needed any of that, and we ended up scaling it back for simplicity purposes. And so I would not do anything differently than what we did, given the situation. But it was just a matter of okay, you can't back yourself into a corner. I guess is that's how it comes down to it. Don't assume you're never going to have big scale, but you don't have to architect for that up front. You can make some changes after the fact, as long as you haven't put yourself in a corner and and you have no way out. So
I think the big thing is being thoughtful about it. Because some things, some engineering problems are so difficult to solve retroactively. I think a really good databases, right? It's really easy to think of times in our careers where we've been in environments where the answer is we need to test in production, and because it's the data set, right? And then we have mismatch in schema between test and production and data seeds. And so I found that getting at least the fundamentals in place early, tracking schema, having a changes for configuration data sets go through dev, through prod, and having workflows for that. Now, not necessarily engineering or building every part of it to high maturity, but getting those incremental steps in place. And I think that's how I at least approach a lot of problems, not only in technology, but in business. It's like, well, we don't necessarily need a big, heavy-handed process, but do want the framework of it in place so
yeah.
we can iterate on it over time.
Well, and it's you always have to have the appropriate framework in place for your size, right? It doesn't mean like you don't want to go through the motions and check boxes just for compliance purposes, right?
Mm.
You know, going through like the SOC 2 process, and getting, you know, our SOC 2 type 2 and all of that. At this point in our company, which is not that large, and quite frankly, even now it's not that large. But when we were 5 people and having to go through this same process, some of it seems absolutely ridiculous, right? It's like, hey, I need to submit an access request, and then I need to approve the access request in order to have a process around access management in place. But having that in place means, okay, now when you actually do add more people, you're not inventing this from scratch, right? And I think that's I think you're right. Having that process in place, understanding just overall change management, and actually having a change management process in place from day one. You know, and that is something that we did from day one. Is around, you know, hey, nothing went into production without somebody else looking at it. You know, I was the original developer that worked on it, but we hired another developer very early on, and hey, code review across the board. You know, and it's just best practice, works better for everybody. And putting that in place allowed us to just, as we added more people, it's just how we did things, and we didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So
Yeah, I love your access control example. And what I do like about SOC 2 is its requirements that we can build controls to meet the
yeah,
requirements. So it's less prescriptive. And access control is one of those things that I introduce in companies of all size. Now, it's not going to be a multi-step process with manual approval and a ticket
yeah,
system and all this stuff, but I'm sure as heck tracking all the access that's assigned, and having a little bit of formality about it.
yeah.
And that's really like the tricky thing. It's like somebody hears access control and they think this big, robust enterprise process. Well, it's not that. It's doing the right thing for us right now. Um, and that's something that can be built on over time.
Yeah, I think just keeping you know, a track of it is the important thing early
Yeah,
on. You
exactly.
know, it's
Tracking it. That's it.
we you know, even at 5 people, we had 50 different systems that people were logging into and access to, right? And so when somebody leaves, where were all their logins? Like, what do I need to shut down? And if you don't know, that is a painful process to go through if you don't have that already managed and under control. So it's
And it,
certainly worth tackling early on.
and it's less work doing that. And like
Yeah.
you said, because trying to figure it all out later, because someone's going to leave the company
Yeah.
inevitably. Well, cool. Great conversation today, Shawn. Thanks so much for being here with us. Any closing thoughts for the audience?
You know, I think you know, I depending on who's listening, if you're starting out and you're just getting something going and you're doing the startup space, you can do it. At the end of the day, it was very intimidating, especially not coming from a healthcare care background, learning what it took because healthcare is a whole specialty that people spend their entire careers in, and there's so much that I didn't know, and so many meetings that I went into not knowing what I felt like I should have known. But you just got to take the step and be willing to learn on the way. Take everything as learning opportunity, and you'll get there as long as you keep moving forward. So.
Fantastic thought, Shawn, and thank you. And thank you all for listening to Project Gamma today, presented by GammaForce.io. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do check us out on your favorite podcast platform to catch future episodes. Take care, everyone.